On behalf of the ISSA Canada Distributor Council, we'd like to sponsor and present the inaugural Power Hour. One of the outcomes from the feedback to our survey work earlier in the year was noting a desire to have more insights around B2B selling. With that in mind, it is my honor to introduce today's guest speaker, Gartner Executive Partner Andy Clement. Andy retired from Kimberly-Clark in March 2024 after an impressive 33-year career where he held various leadership roles, including Chief Customer Officer, Vice President of Sales, General Manager, Strategy Director, Marketing Director, and Manufacturing Director. In August 2024, he joined Gartner, where he now coaches, mentors, and challenges sales leaders who are Gartner clients. Clement is a proud father of two. His son Jackson works in sales, and his daughter Gracie is a student at Kennesaw State University. His wife Diana is an artist. Outside of work, he enjoys golfing, boating, traveling, and spending quality time with his family. I'd like to add that I got to know Andy while we were both with Kimberly-Clark. Through my time there, I had somewhere around 12 different bosses. Throughout that run, Andy was probably one of the longest tenured and certainly one of my favorites. Please join me in welcoming Andy.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Hello, ISSA Canada. Thank you for having me today. I'm very excited to share with you some Gartner research. This is actually the keynote that we gave at our May conference just a few months ago. I will move and progress the screen here. And Tom has already done a fabulous job talking a little bit about my bio, but just to show it in a few pictures, you can see the picture from me. I won't say the year, but we'll just say early 90s, first day of work at Scott Paper, that, as many of you know, merged with Kimberly-Clark shortly thereafter. Blue suit, red tie, and that thin briefcase where before we needed to put laptops in them. Maybe a few of you remember those days. But anyway, fast forward 33 years. I retired from Kimberly-Clark at our sales meeting earlier this year. I had a wonderful career. The last 10 years, I was head of sales for North America for KC Professional, which is when Tom and I, and probably a few of you on the horn today, got to know each other, had a wonderful career, spent a few years also on the board of ISSA in the US, which was awesome. I quickly learned, though, that retirement was not for me, and I joined Gartner 3 months ago. I had been a client of Gartner's for 4 years, my last 4 years at KC. Joined Gartner a few months ago, spoke, and gave this presentation at the MDM Shift Conference in Denver a couple months ago. So looking forward to being with you today. I will make one very shameless plug for Gartner, and then I won't mention it again, but we are a team of experts to really help you drive your sales growth. And I'm one of 6 executive partners that coaches chief sales officers each and every day and heads of sales for B2B sales in North America, or actually globally. And then we have a number of advisors that you see on the screen here from various elements of B2B sales, from strategy to execution to segmentation, technology, everything you can imagine. So if you ever have a need for any of that, don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I will also have, of course, my information at the end of the presentation. But that is the last of the Gartner plugs, I promise. So let's get into it. It's been a crazy few years, I think we all can admit to. We thought it was kind of crazy before 2020, but it's gotten crazier, and you know this. And so the purpose of today's presentation is, how do we tame the chaos within our business, within our sales organization? Over the past 3-4 years, there has been so much change. First, there was COVID in 2020. And then shortly thereafter, we all remember the supply chain crises of 2021 and early 2022. And then we got to inflation in 2022 and 2023. And right about the time we thought things were dying down, now many of us as sales leaders are dealing with artificial intelligence and the surge there. And if you think about it, it's getting to the point now that it's not if a big event is going to happen, but when. And when it does, as leaders, how do we respond? Today's discussion, really, for all of us as sales and business leaders, though, is how to survive, how to grow, and how to win when we know each and every year that type of chaos is going to be constant. And how can we get ahead of all of this, knowing that this chaos is inevitable? So let me pause for a minute and ask you maybe to raise your virtual hand, not that I can see it, and ask you, do you really think your sales organization today is adaptable, honestly, I probably would not have raised my hand at Kimberly-Clark the last 4 or 5 years, right? And as much as I'd like to maybe blame that on my team, it was really probably more so my fault, right? Because we often, as sales leaders, delegate this adaptability to our sales organization. And let's face it, we don't necessarily make it easy on them as leaders, right? I mean, how many of you have ever asked this of your teams? I know I did at a time, like, hey, can everybody jump in an all hands call, at 6 a.m. this morning? It's really important, team. Or here's one of my favorite. We're going to throw a number of senior executives at this client renewal at the last minute, even though most of these senior executives have never really called on customers before. I'm sure nobody's ever done that here, but I've heard that before, we'll just say. Well, I think we all would agree that acting this way is not sustainable for our teams. It's, in all honesty, too much drama. We add burden to our sellers, often forcing them to adapt. And well, I'll tell you this, from our Gartner research, 83% of sales leaders say their sellers struggle to adapt to changing customer needs and expectations. Additionally, 89% of B2B sellers say they are burned out today. And what makes that even worse is overwhelmed sellers are 43% less likely to hit their quota. So we've got a lot of burned out sellers. We have many of them then not making their quota. Well, what does that mean for us as business and sales leaders for hitting our target? Going to be tough, right? Now, many of us as sales leaders want to focus on talent, but what we have found at Gartner is just changing your talent is not necessarily the solution for us. This is more of a systemic problem. And the question for all of us is, how do we win without the drama? COVID, supply chain, inflation, now AI. Who saw these things coming? I mean, who in 2019 had a business plan that was predicting COVID? Who in 2020 was predicting supply chain challenges the following year? Who 12 to 18 months ago saw AI coming and having to deal with all of that? Let's face it, these black swan events are now the new normal. And all of us struggle to adapt, even sales leaders. Sales leaders, as you can see here, 2 out of 3 sales leaders struggle to adapt budget and resources to a sudden change. And our typical approach to managing the chaos often leads to more chaos. There is constant pressure for many of us as sales and business leaders to make changes. We hire, then we have layoffs. We do cost cutting. Oh, but now we got to take a lot of money and invest it in artificial intelligence. Adapting by necessity, it feels dynamic, but let's face it, it really is more like being reactive. And none of us wants to run our field sales teams or our business in a reactive mode. And I would tell you, there is bigger pressure on sales leaders more than any other function. I mean, we have pressure every quarter to hit the number. And studies would show at Gartner that if you are a sales leader and you miss your number 2 quarters in a row, your job could be at risk. And I think we'd all agree that other C-suite jobs like the CMO, the head of supply chain, the head of HR, they don't have this type of pressure. It leads us to fight another day, and often to be reactive. Additionally, many of us have monolithic, large structures that limits our ability to be dynamic and agile. Many of our organizations, they weren't built for this because they were designed for a world that was more stable and more predictable, and that world, it no longer exists today. So we need to pivot from being adaptive by necessity to adaptive by design. Let me give you an analogy. Think of a winning race car team. They're planning their pit stops well ahead of time, many times before the race even starts. A reactive pit stop, not usually a good thing. Typically leads to lost time and a bad position in that race. Adaptive by design allows us to race ahead of the competition. Additionally, adaptive by design sales teams are almost 200% more likely to capture the full potential of one of these types of events. And also, adaptive teams are 3 times more likely to win and have strong performance. These are big numbers here. Imagine these organizations taking market share in times of turbulence. Adaptability, yes, it starts with us as leaders, but it all quickly moves to our sellers. And it needs to be connected to our people, our data, our systems, and our processes. It needs to be woven into our organizational DNA. Now, let me give you an example of an athlete that was adaptive by design. Now, arguably, and this is probably more of a US comment, one of the most decorated Winter Olympic athletes of all time, Apollo Ono. Okay. Apollo, some of you may remember, was an 8-time medalist in short track speed skating. He won in 2002, 2006, and 2010. So he was successful across 3 different Olympics over that time period. Now, in his first Olympics in 2002, Apollo easily won. He was bulkier, he was more explosive, he blew away the competition. But fast forward a few years later, Apollo, to win his second Olympics, realized he had to adapt. His competition, well, they were skinnier than him, and they were faster and leaner. And so he had to drop actually 20 pounds in 2006 to adapt to keep up with the Olympics and actually win, which he did in 2006 and 2010. Apollo had low ego, he had adaptability, and that led to sustained success. So what does this mean for B2B selling? Well, first and foremost, it starts with a decision-making framework. Now, we have a framework at Gartner that I'm going to talk to you about in a minute called the Midas decision-making model. This decision-making model, from my experience in business, is not rocket science, okay? I mean, you may not actually have the Midas decision-making model at your own company, but you have a decision-making model whether you think about it or not on a daily basis. And so what we have found at Gartner is the competitive advantage is not the model here, it's how quickly you move through the 5 steps of this model. So let's talk about those 5 steps of the decision-making model. The first is to monitor, to observe signals of change, looking at your data. The second step is to interpret, is to find insight in the data, the why of what's happening in that data. The third step is to decide. And in this step, you are evaluating courses of action to take based on the data you've monitored and interpreted. Now, the fourth step, in my opinion, is the most important one, and often the one where sales and business leaders get caught up, and that is to act. Here you are executing the decision and triggering action and change based on the data and based on the options you came up in deciding. So you're actually acting on it quickly. And then the fifth step, also very important, that is to sustain. That is basically driving the change management within your organization. Good leaders basically rely on their sales leaders often to drive this change. Now, as I mentioned, and as you're probably getting there, these 5 steps are not rocket science, right? The key, though, is being able to move through these 5 steps at a quick pace to be successful. So, with that as the backdrop, I will tell you there are 3 critical enablers to move through the decision-making process model quickly. And those are revenue intelligence, technology as a teammate, and modularity. So if you want to have a successful sales team that is more agile, this is important. Revenue intelligence, tech as a teammate, and modularity. I'm going to talk about each of those 3, and then I'm going to give you an example of a company that within their sales organization used each of them to be successful. So let's get started. The first one is revenue intelligence. Now, I think we'd all agree that data is great, but do you ever feel like maybe you have too much data? I mean, I remember at Kimberly-Clark years ago, we had what felt like no data, okay? And then all of a sudden, fast forward, and about 5 or 6 years ago, we had Excel sheets of data that we were monitoring, right? Well, revenue intelligence helps contextualize the data to deliver insights. Look at the items on the screen here. Revenue intelligence is made up of these items: conversational intelligence, emotional intelligence, forecast predictors, opportunity health assessments, and AI-guided selling. All of these help contextualize the data. Let me give you an example. Many of you, of course, have your CRM system. You have your pipeline that you're looking at, right? But do you ever look at your pipeline and think, wow, how do I get more out of this? What is it telling me? Well, let me give you an example of a company that had that problem. You're probably not familiar with the company. They're not in our industry. They're a company called Mimecast. They're a leader in email security software, and they had pipeline problems. And they looked at their pipeline and used revenue intelligence. And they did this by monitoring literally thousands of seller calls. What they did was they first looked at the where, and they realized that their opportunities often get stolen or lost, and they wanted to know where that was. And they found that in their CRM process, that the deals were getting lost in the discovery phase. So then they dug deeper, and they needed to know the who. So they identified the prospects who were falling out of the funnel in that discovery phase, and these were prospects that went through no product demo. And what they found for these prospects is these were buyers with no experience of their brand or their product. Then they went even deeper. They went further to find the why. And they studied which seller behaviors led to a demo and which seller behaviors did not. And they figured this out by simply listening to a lot of the seller calls. And what they found out is that their high performers listened and asked more questions. They listened to the customers and they asked more questions versus just going to a product dump. And then Mimecast focused on the how. They started equipping their new business sellers with asking better questions and doing better activities. And they leveraged their enablement and their sales capability team to be more successful, to get their sellers there. Revenue intelligence sharpened their understanding of the data and exactly what was happening. And when they put this in place, they started seeing a lot more success. And you can see the results here on the screen. They saw a 30% increase in lead conversion, a 173% increase in pipeline, and a 77% increase in order value. Now, folks, this is what pays the bills, and this is the end result that they were looking for. Now, let's shift gears here and talk about the second critical enabler, and that is technology as a teammate. Now, we get the benefits of technology that we give our sellers, but our sellers don't always get the benefits. And they don't always look at technology change as necessarily a good thing for them. It often can lead to tech fatigue by our sellers. And sometimes this is a burden they are forced to comply with. Let me give you an example. Anybody ever have trouble with their CRM adoption the first time when they moved maybe to Salesforce.com or another CRM system? As I'm sure Tom will remember, we had challenges at Kimberly-Clark when we first launched Salesforce.com. That's going on about, I don't know, 15 years ago, right? And we had set it up not to be a teammate, but just a tool for our sellers to take, right? And we asked them to have way too much information in there. Our marketing team wanted all kinds of things. Our sales analytics team did at the time. It was a bit of a debacle, okay? And so we had to relaunch it many times through the years to ultimately get rid of that tech fatigue. And I think we all would agree, we spend too much money on technology to make it a burden. It should be a teammate that we delegate and our sellers delegate tasks to help them. And good sales organizations, from my perspective, use technology to improve their seller capability and their seller capacity. And when you do this, your sellers really like the technology and see it as a teammate. Let me give you another example of a company that took advantage of this. This one you've probably heard of, Lenovo. They're a hardware and storage company, and their sellers in this case struggled with timely and relevant content. Now, Lenovo had great content. It was just very cumbersome for sellers to deploy to customers. We want our sellers to use effective and tailored materials. And Lenovo gave them good content, but it was designed for creative efficiency, not for seller efficiency. The best sellers we have found through Gartner studies, unfortunately, are stuck spending 3 hours per week of lost time basically customizing customer-facing data. And we've looked at over 10,000 sellers and coming up with this. 3 hours per week spent there. Sellers are doing it because they know it improves their ability to close the deal. But what a waste of time if we could avoid it. Well, Lenovo kind of thought the same thing. So to fix this, they handed a lot of this over to generative AI. They had an active collaboration with sales and marketing to fix it, and they made it easy for sellers to create customized content. They moved from technology as a tool to technology as a teammate. And they saw significant improvements in this case. You can see the numbers here on the screen. They went from basically a cost of $13,500 per product to $7 per product to actually make this type of materials. And then they went from a timeline of about 8 weeks to just seconds to create this. Additionally, they saw about a $2.5 million in savings from making these changes. But to me, what was the best thing was not necessarily the savings, but it freed up their seller time to do what sellers want to do, which is get in front of a customer versus be internal and create this kind of stuff. So that's technology as a teammate. Which leads us to the third critical enabler, and that is modularity. And this is really thinking differently about your sales approach. Good analogy for this is Legos. I think we all know Legos. We love them as a kid, and as a parent, they're kind of expensive, and then you step on them so they can be a bit of a pain. But the analogy with Lego is basically you can adjust your bricks quickly based on the business situation. And that's what you want to do with your sales organization. Modularity makes us more nimble managing our sales resources. Think about this idea of building to rebuild. So let me make it real for you. I mean, many of us in our industry in sales, we have our generalist sellers. And they're great, but we ask them to do a lot. We ask them to acquire new customers, to renew existing deals, to resell deals that maybe are at risk, to cross-sell or upsell or mix shift these same customers or other customers. Oh, and of course, to service the customers as well. And that's a lot for these generalist sellers, right? And what we have found at Gartner is these types of sellers are 58% less likely to have good performance versus those sellers that are doing just hunting and just farming. So what we see a lot of companies doing now, and this is what actually we have at Gartner, is companies are taking their generalist sellers and they're splitting them out to either business developers or account managers. So business developers go out and hunt, and they are measured and paid on certain ways. And then account managers are basically designed to resell accounts, to mix shift, to upshift accounts. And some companies are even going further where they are adding lead generators, or often known as SDRs, to their business developers, and then adding customer success managers to their account managers to help really existing clients and customers succeed. This type of model gives chief sales officers more modularity. It reduces seller burden. Really think of it as a specialization strategy. So, adaptive sales organizations, as you've heard me say, they really do three things. Adaptive sales organization move from revenue data to revenue intelligence. They move from technology tools to technology teammates, and they move from monolithic structures to modular alternatives. These things crack the chaos and can make your organization 3 times more likely to succeed and hit the number. So all sounds good, but what does it look like in design? Well, we actually found one organization that we used as a case study who are doing all 3 of these things successfully within their business and their sales organization. Might have heard of the company. We used them at Kimberly-Clark. We use them at Gartner. They're known as Workday, an enterprise software company. You may have heard of Workday, but you probably have not heard of Workday's Demand Squad, which is basically part of how Workday goes to business or goes to market. This is a modular experimentation team that tests out ideas with customers. The team purpose is to test alternatives. They're free from the pressure of hitting their quota or servicing existing customers or growing their pipeline. And the Demand Squad has really been built on an organizational strength within Workday. Within Workday, they've exercised the muscle of innovation with a willingness to test and to innovate. And you can see kind of how it works on the screen here. Workday runs through their demand squad 4-week sprints to put the demand squad in action. After a sprint, they make a quick decision on where to take the business. It's an active cycle that informs their sales planning, and it helps them accelerate through the Midas decision-making process. Remember the Midas decision-making process from a few minutes ago? Well, Workday monitors what's happening in their funnel, the first step. They look for signals that were interrupted to give them actionable intelligence in the second step. Then they use technology teammates using machine learning to accelerate decision-making and solution development in the third step. They're ready to act in the fourth step, but only on a minimally viable solution, not necessarily to everybody, but minimally viable to see if it works. And then they lastly sustain the ideas in an idea library, emphasizing change management. Additionally, the rest of the organization, when new businesses or new products are introduced, the sellers have more confidence knowing the ideas have been pressure tested with customers and are likely going to succeed already. And the results are pretty impressive with the Workday Demand Squad. Now, because this is a big deal and Workday is actually over a $7 billion company, they actually have 250 squad mates focused on this. Now, that's a lot of people, and I about fell out of my chair when I saw that, right? But I will tell you, this same analogy applies to smaller groups of folks testing out ideas as well. It doesn't have to be 250. It can be 5, it can be 15. You get the idea. But at Workday, they have 250. Over the past few years, they've run 300 tests. Only 15% of those tests became scaled, which means they killed about 85% of them. But those 15% that succeeded improved the value of their company 10%. And as I mentioned a second ago, Workday is a $7 billion company, so 10% is pretty massive. Workday is an example of a company that's adaptive by design. So the lesson here is that revenue intelligence, technology as a teammate, and modularity are strategic levers that us as sales and business leaders can help us get through the chaos. Now, many of you may be saying, Andy, sounds great, but where do I start? And so I think my main call to action, first and foremost, is think about how do you make your organization more adaptive by design so you can take share. And our suggestion at Gartner is first and foremost to start with revenue intelligence. This is the biggest option for you. Kill those dashboards that distract you. Focus on those numbers that are more forward-looking versus backward-looking, and collect and monitor new signals to give you that intelligence. Secondly, after you've done that, identify tech as a teammate opportunities. At Gartner, we do a lot of time spent analysis studies for our clients. We actually have off-the-shelf products our clients run with, and it helps identify where are sellers wasting their time and what can be automated to truly create technology as a teammate opportunities. And then thirdly, our last recommendation is embrace experimentation versus perfection and explore new go-to-market ideas. So I'll leave you with this. Remember, likely next year, it won't be normal. We don't know what the Black Swan event's going to be, but it's likely coming, but that's okay. It creates an opportunity for you to take share, and to do so, just adapt to what is coming in your go-to-market and your sales team. So everybody, hopefully that makes sense. Thank you for today. And I think at this point, Tom, we will open it up to questions.
Indeed. Andy, if you can stop sharing your screen, I think you closed the presentation, but didn't take screen sharing off.
I'm trying to do
Or maybe
that.
Tanya can force the issue for you.
Yeah, if you can, Tanya. It's showing I'm not sharing, but I must be.
There. All right.
Better? Yeah.
I'm happy to say I took you out. So I was thinking your last slide, and I remember you coming into your role where you became my boss, and it was a rather chaotic run. And you said something to me along the, yeah, I can't wait for things to get normal and settle down. And I think my advice to you was, Andy, there is no normal. So that's
10 years later, you're totally right, Tom. Yes. Never slowed down.
All right. I've seen one question here from Sean O'Hearn. He's asking, can you elaborate on some of the generative AI attributes, benefits we should be looking for within our industry?
Yeah, I mean, so it's very much an emerging trend, I would tell you, for our industry for sure. We have done a recent seller skill study and found that actually sellers that do use Gen AI are more successful, but there's only about 7% of sellers that are really using it effectively now. So no matter, and that's across all industries. So what we have found is though, it can be pretty simple starting, right? Which is first and foremost thinking about what are the right use cases for your sales team, right? So are there ways for them kind of to that we see rewriting emails, using Chat GBT or using their own AI tool, pull out menial tasks, capture the minutes for a meeting potentially more effectively. So sellers are doing it that way. And then the other thing that good sellers are doing is they're very smart on the prompts they use with AI. Okay. Um, Making sure that you're just asking the right things to get what you need. So, and hey, experimentation is key here, I would say. But we have a new case study that just actually came out this week, where Cisco Systems is actually using AI, and a lot of it is front end of funnel information, right? Looking at their customers to determine who are the best opportunities for new business, who are the customers that are at risk, and then can you do the right emails, do the right prompts for your sellers to kind of open up those doors using AI as well, based on the success ratio. And the last thing I'll say is you got to have pretty good data to make sure you're getting those answers, right? So make sure you've got the right data analytics or revenue intelligence to get you there as well. So hopefully that makes sense.
So are there firms specializing in data mining? Like I know I can think of companies that would have their analysts work through that, but is there more kind of off the shop shelf or SaaS solutions where you can have that as a plug-in or an add-on to your ERP or something along that line that can help give more informative insights, because yeah, I remember data overkill, right? And it was the magic was being able to drill down and like we used to talk the old RBM days, peel the layers off the onions to get to the good information, right? So
I believe there are companies that assist with that, Tom. I'm not an expert necessarily in that respect, but I do believe there are. But you're also going to have just, the right setup internally as well, to get the most out of it. But I know there are, a number of, CRM systems out there now that will look at your pipeline and based on the kind of the historical record that's out there on deals you've closed, what do other end users or accounts look like that could be comparable? So there are that more and more so some of that data analytics and AI are being built into, some of the technology providers that are out there for sales.
Hmm.
all
I have
right.
a quick question for you there, Andy. You
Sure.
showed an image of yourself right at the beginning of your presentation of yourself in a suit with a briefcase in your hand. And that intimates to me, and perhaps I date myself, but at one time, salespeople needed to be out in front of their customers. With COVID and all of that, what trends are you seeing now in terms of, salespeople, boots on the ground, being in front of customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. I would tell you, like, all the studies Gartner has find that most buyers, especially millennials and Gen Z, prefer the digital interaction versus the face-to-face. However, it is also very common for these same buyers to have a lot of buyer remorse when they do that. So they're not happy when they make the decision from making the decision online or just having an interaction that's kind of virtual. So I would tell you, we see a lot of companies still doing the hybrid selling, which may be, two-thirds or three-quarters virtual, but the occasional in person as well to kind of build that confidence and build the relationship with the buyer, is exactly how, Tom and I and many folks probably on the call grew up, right? Was making sure that you were doing more of that in person. And I don't think it's as important now, but I still think there's a level of importance for it. I think the most effective sellers are kind of thinking about where they are in the sales process and then making the decision, can I do this virtually first? Great. If not, okay, let me go do it in person, especially for the big deal.
Wow.
Mhm.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. Mhm.
So to build on that, Andy, you had your one slide sort of I've seen it called I think a sales cell, right? Where there's the hunters, there's someone generating kind of sales or marketing qualified leads for them, and then you have a customer success rep, and then the farmer, the account manager. So they can be kind of an integrated little team. But sales organization, from your own experience or your work through Gartner, or have you seen a shift from sales reps on the road? Like you called it hybrid, but they're still kind of a sales rep with a car and had the ability to be physically in front of customers. Is there more shift to inside selling, like reps full time that are strictly doing virtual selling and outreach that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think a little bit depends on the industry, right? I think our industry, although is evolving more to inside sales, and I think most companies have expanded more. I think when you look at some of the digital industries, it's probably even more so, almost 100% digital virtual selling now versus kind of a mix or hybrid like we've got now. I do think there's probably, it may continue to move more digital over time, but a lot of that transition has already come. And I definitely would encourage you to think about the modularity of your sales org. It is a bit of a different person to go hunt new labels, I think, versus maintain existing accounts. Both are critically important roles, but I think how you measure who you hire for, the job descriptions, the skills are really a little different. And we've got that at Gartner, a dedicated team who just hunts new labels, and then when they close the deal, they hand it over to kind of the account executive who kind of manages the customer relationship and the renewal from there on out. It's obviously a bit of a different business model, selling janitorial products versus selling consulting services and advising like we have here at Gartner. But even at Kimberly-Clark, we had tried some of those things out with some success the last few years as well. So.
Hmm.
Mm.
All right, I'm going to go to a question in the chat here from Chris Bowman. He says, thanking you for this, Andy. And then he's asking, does Gartner offer workshops, seminars, or newsletters for additional access to industry intel or insight?
We do, definitely, and if you'd like, I can get a link to kind of the website to either Tanya or Tom afterwards. There are a lot of free workshops and presentations that we give. There's a lot of access to a lot of the materials that we talk about, and I will warn you that once you sign up for one or two from Gartner, we will never forget you, and you'll get reminded of things. But that may be a good thing because we're constantly coming out with new research. We just had a presentation actually yesterday. It was open to the public on the what chief sales officers are thinking about for their vision for 2025. And by the way, I'm in the sales practice, but there is the same information for marketing, for supply chain, for IT technology. We probably do 10 webinars a week on artificial intelligence. It's just
Wow.
absolutely overwhelming from our technology side. So certainly we'll get that information out there, but I'd encourage you to take advantage of it. There's tons of information for sure.
On that note, you had mentioned earlier as well that 89% of sellers are burned out. Like, do you guys offer resources for salespeople for rejuvenation to get them remotivated, even for executive teams to channel that motivation back down to their teams? Do you have that as well?
Definitely, definitely. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we do work with kind of companies to run the time study to see where people are getting bogged down in their time to kind of free up time for them to sell more. We've got a ton of information on culture and change management, which is critically important, I think, for sales and areas. A sales leader that is, and Tom did the same. I mean, we really focused on making sure we had a good culture at Kimberly-Clark, and so I think there's a ton of information and analysis we can do for folks as well there. So certainly, if you're interested in any of that stuff, reach out to me. Be happy to talk to you and kind of not only share what we have, but honestly, I feel like the Gartner product is very affordable too, compared to some of the other consulting firms that I worked with at KC, like Bain, BCG, and McKinsey through the years. It's a
Mm.
different product slightly, but I think it's what we offer at Gartner is more ongoing coaching versus just a project or a project-based initiative, which is what a lot of other consulting companies do.
Ricardo, he says recently he noticed public sector business is being acquired via digital RFPs, difficult to establish in-person meeting with the client from the start unless they select your offer. I was wondering if there could be a way to establish other ways to communicate ideally in person. I've noticed there are an increasing amount of businesses lowering standards by undercutting expert services, subcontracting non-trained individuals to minimize costs. How do you professionally address this problem? And then he asked by implementing the Midas system. So
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily have a good answer for that one, Ricardo. I'm sorry. Maybe I can think about it and get your information, see if we've got anything. Happy to bring it back to a Gartner expert on it, but there's a lot there. I think probably it's not an easy short answer, right? But some combination of kind of sales relationships and marketing is what immediately comes to mind. But I know that's not exactly what you're looking for, and my guess is it's more than the Midas system. To your point, so
yeah, I think if you're only participating in an RFP, it's hard to break that cycle. I think the challenge is to identify prior to the RFP going out, who are the key stakeholders, and is there a way that you can have an intervention, whether uh, strategically building a relationship through a platform like LinkedIn, establish your credentials as you build that relationship, seeing if
yeah.
there's some kind of a marketing intervention that you can get their attention and maybe draw more attention to your RFP offer rather than it just being one of many submissions. Just off the top of my head, that's a couple thoughts. So.
That's good, Tom. Thank you.
There is another question from Rachel. Any tips to reduce the issues with new CRM implementation and tech fatigue?
Oh, yes. We've all lived through that and have our battle scars, don't we? Yes. Lots of tips. A few things come to mind. I feel like sometimes companies are rushing to launch their CRM system, but sometimes it's better to go slow, to go fast later. I would pull together kind of a crossed some of your better sellers who are most respected in to kind of workshop it with you to really think through what can make the CRM system either a better launch or more effective. Think about having champions in each of your sales teams or each of your sales districts who are folks that are really experts at CRM that can be kind of go-to people for you. Additionally, after you implement, think about having just a call, an optional call every week or every 2 weeks where people can call in and get their questions answered. And I think really just putting the right eye on, okay, do we have the right things we're asking within our CRM system, or is it too much? I loved my marketing brethren. I spent some time in marketing, but I often felt that they wanted every detail out of the CRM system, even though they had no idea how to use it. And that often and many times sub-optimized our sales team as well. But we've got lots of information at Gartner on CRM adoption. Those are just kind of a few quick things that kind of come to mind. And the last thing I'll say is just, if you can tie more and more of your technology add-ons to your CRM system, then it becomes one system for your sellers to use versus 4 or 5. Okay, so give you an example of Kimberly-Clark. When we introduced a new sales methodology called value selling a few years ago, we tied that to our Salesforce.com system. Okay, so sellers are going to Salesforce.com, preparing for a call using value selling, but putting it into their CRM system versus a completely different system. We learned that the hard way through the years, but that's just another thing that comes to mind. So hopefully that
If I
helps.
can add, because I shared some of those same scars with Andy through those successive implementations, I think first and foremost, make sure that sales technology and CRM falls within this is viewed by the sales team as something that helps them do their job. And I think with Kimberly-Clark, when we had to do our first reboot, there was too many stakeholders, and it seemed like the salesperson was too far down the list. We remember we went in to visit with Salesforce in their offices in San Francisco, and what was fascinating to me was a number of their business leaders from different levels of their hierarchy were telling us how they used Salesforce themselves to manage their business, and and it was remarkably simpler than what Kimberly-Clark was trying to do. And so then the other big thing with a CRM is that from kind of a top-down management, your senior management have to show that they're active daily users. It doesn't have to be a got you. It can be an encouraging. Hey, you got to see you have this new opportunity in your pipeline that looks really interesting. Can I help you with that? What resources from our organizations can we bring to bear? But it demonstrates that everyone's committed. It's just not yet another whip, falling on the backs of the sales team.
So we
Well
have
said.
another question from Chris, and he
Awesome.
says it's his last question, but that's okay, Chris. If you have others, please add. So is the Midas system something that individual reps can onboard with or without the organizational support, or is it vital to have an entire organization multi-department support?
I think it's okay to, I mean, it's best if everybody's using it, but I think it's okay if it's just, individual teams using it. And, as I said, it's not necessarily about that methodology being just the end all. It's a matter of really making sure you're going through all the 5 steps and thinking about it as a seller or as a leader, right? Especially acting on it. And then where a lot of companies get lost also is the change management, because you can act on the decision, but if you don't have it kind of think about change management there at the end, everything you've done ahead of time may just fall flat in its face, right?
Mm.
But best to use, I think, Chris, throughout the org. But hey, if you wanted to try it on a team or with some sellers using those 5 steps, I think that could work too.
And you're kind of talking about adaptability, some of the things that necessitate that. And I was making a note, I was calling it more barriers to adaptability. You mentioned ego. Can you talk a little bit more about that and where that comes into play?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes leaders have an ego that they can just kind of figure this stuff out on their own without actually looking at especially the revenue intelligence side of things, right? Some of us that have been in our job a long time maybe think we know it all and have the ego and tend to trust our emotion or our gut more than the data. And so I would say, best case is put that ego aside and let the data do the talking, which is never easy as a sales leader. And certainly I can think back, Tom, you probably can too, where maybe we didn't do that as well as we could have at times, but you learn from your mistakes and put that ego aside. So does that make sense?
Yeah. All right. And then just as you're saying that, I was sort of thinking about another aspect of this. A lot of this seems within reach of a large enterprise that maybe has more financial resources. We have a lot of smaller businesses that are part of our organization. Any quick tips, starting points for a small organization that maybe they're a little more risk adverse? It's hard to reshape your sales organization or add resources there. Like, how can you start some of this with the limited means you might have?
Yeah, I mean, I might argue that a smaller or mid-sized organization possibly could be more agile and move more quickly than, say, a Kimberly-Clark, but there's more of a monolithic structure, as Tom knows, right? That, we eventually made changes, but it took a while to get everybody there because there was just so many folks, right? But, hey, I think starting with revenue intelligence is probably the same avenue, right? Looking at your data, focusing on kind of those things that seem to be hitting closer. And sometimes smaller organizations, there's less layers, and so you might be closer to the market and see these things coming quicker than, say, bigger companies are. So I think you can do it. And you know may certain areas might be harder, but other areas I think you could move faster even.
All right, thanks. I think we're getting close to wrapping up. I want to point out, if you can see it back in the chat, there's links to the distributor survey. We would still trying to gather more insights. We did all right the first time through, but I think the more people we have active and responding, the more robust the insights we have, and the better the distributor council can work to support distributors and increase their feelings of importance within ISSA Canada. So last call, any other questions to throw in the chat? I think we caught everyone there, Tanya. There's nothing
Yes.
hanging that we missed.
No, there is not.
Andy, I'm going to ask you to gaze into your crystal ball. It's hard to predict, but what are some of the potential big business risks going forward that people should be forward thinking about, anticipating, and knowing that they're going to have to address?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly artificial intelligence and making sure you're leveraging that and getting the most out of it is one that, I know we're all probably tired of thinking about, but that's key. And that obviously ties to kind of technology as a teammate. The economy, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, right? Over the next couple
Tariffs?
years. Well, right. So I think that's an ongoing risk, the one we probably talk about for the future. And then I just think really getting down do you have the right skills and competencies with your sales orgs these days? Are you thinking about kind of that seller of the future would be the other thing that I think is just a risk for companies or in our industry to try to get right as well. So hopefully those all resonate.
Well, from my perspective, thank you very much, Andy. I really appreciate the generous availing of your time. I think some great insights there, very useful information. So, Tanya, I'll turn it
Absolutely.
back to
Yeah.
you.
Andy, yeah, I concur. Also, very good. Thank you for the information. Again, I stress to everyone, if you do have questions for Andy that come up after this presentation, please send me an email and I will make sure that they get on to Andy. I thank you all for attending today. Thank you very much, Tom, Andy, and we'll see you again at our next Power Hour. Thank you.